Hello, everyone, and welcome to RestartED's virtual town hall. This is the first in a series of panel discussions with educators devoted to rethinking, reimagining, and restarting our schools. Thank you for joining us. My name is Greg Tafaro. I'm a reporter with USA Today Network New Jersey newspapers, and I'm honored to moderate this paramount conversation. RestartED is a dedicated group of educators. Their focus is on reopening schools amid the coronavirus pandemic and modernizing education through dialogue and action. Their goal is to improve the collective capacity of educators to serve students, staff, and communities. Our panel of experts in alphabetical order includes Dr. David Adderhold, President of the Garden State Coalition of Schools and Superintendent of the West Windsor-Plainsboro Regional School District. Dr. Scott Rocco, President of the New Jersey Association of School Administrators and Superintendent of the Hamilton Township School District. Dr. Charles Sampson, Superintendent of the Freehold Regional High School District, and Marlon Stiles Jr., Superintendent of the Middletown City School District in Middletown, Ohio. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you for hosting, Greg.
Thank you, Scott. Joining us in cyberspace from the chat room are Dr. Jay Micah, Superintendent of the Matawan Aberdeen Regional School District, and Dr. Mike Salvatore, Superintendent of Long Branch Public Schools and the 2019 New Jersey Superintendent of the Year. They'll be monitoring your questions and feedback in real time. Jay and Mike, thank you as well. Throughout this town hall, the panel welcomes your questions and encourages you to share ideas as we create a collaborative atmosphere designed to strengthen education. While this academic year in New Jersey will conclude with remote instruction, plans regarding in-person instruction, virtual learning, or a hybrid model for the summer and ensuing school year remain ambiguous as educators await directives from the governor's administration. Guidance is expected to be delivered in the coming weeks. What those guidelines and safety protocols may look like or entail is unclear. Amid the uncertainty in a COVID-19 world remains one constant. Dedicated educators will continue to face unprecedented challenges as they strive to meet the academic, emotional, and basic needs of students. The following excerpt from a recent RestartED essay captures the quintessence of tonight's virtual town hall, and I quote, "Moving school districts forward in uncertain times with limited guidance has the potential to create more harm than good. Clear guidance rooted in science and data is needed. Health and education experts must outline specific plans and protocols with multiple pathways leading to the opening of our schools. Modernization of our public schools to provide normalcy in an abnormal situation should be an outgrowth of that process. We believe that achieving excellence in 3 key areas will allow our schools to thrive during this crisis. Those areas are continuance of operations, assessment and mitigation of current and post-COVID-19 trauma, and planning for the reopening of schools," unquote. With the proper context and perspective having been provided, let's get this conversation underway, starting with some questions for our panelists that participants submitted. Gentlemen, what will education look like, and how quickly can a decision be made to ensure adequate planning time?
Scott, you want to take that?
Sure, I'll start with that. So how quickly can a decision be made? I think the issue here right now is that things are changing by the moment. And a decision that is made today is not going to necessarily be the decision that's going to be around in July or August. So what we have to do is we have to make multiple decisions or multiple options. And so the public needs to know, and the staff needs to know, and the community needs to know that as we're designing things, a decision that is made today will be a decision of multiple options based on various scenarios that we think are going to be present when it's time to open in September. What's the adequate planning time? The adequate planning time on these type of things, really, when you roll something out that's large scale, you need 6-8 months to roll things out. We're talking about a very condensed period of time, 2.5 to 3 months. So the adequate planning time here is super condensed to make a tough decision on this. But what you're going to see from school districts on a decision is going to be multiple scenarios. You're not going to see one, you're going to see multiple.
If I could build on that, first of all, thank you to everyone who's joining us. Really appreciate it. If we're going to build on that, if we're being real about this, the decision was needed 2 months ago. The reality is that schools don't shift quickly, and that trying to move school systems, and we represent on this call 40,000 students, right? So we're trying to think in terms of how do we shift school systems and make decisions that are appropriate in time if we're talking about public health and safety. All the planning decisions, all the micro decisions that need to be made, impacts of master schedules, impacts of transportation, impacts to contracts, impact to modification of facilities. We need those decisions today so that we can adequately plan, and we're well beyond adequately budgeting. And for the most part, we can all assume we're going to lose state aid. So you start playing out the scenarios. We have a lot of concern about the field being prepared for the fall.
Yeah, I'll just jump on that a little bit. And I'd love to hear Marlon's perspective in Ohio as well, because we're all Jersey based. But what's going to be critical here, I think, is to be flexible. You have to have iterative processes for your plans, because I'll use graduation as the example. We've had 4 different graduation plans thus far. There's no current guidance for summer programs. A number of us are part of different task force, state restart committees. We've all put out there that we understand that it's a shifting dynamic, but the firmer that a deadline can be made to make a call, the more readily we're going to be able to prepare. But right now, every school district at least on the East Coast, is planning for 4 different scenarios: full remote, 25% of your students, half your students, 3/4 of your students, and building from there. A/B schedules, flexible days. Dave put together, I think it's up to 284 questions at this point, and they're all good.
You can't 100% go back to the old system in the way that was. So we have to modernize. We have to figure out ways that we can do things more efficiently and more effectively. And, I've also said that the knock on education is we're not in the real world. Well, tell that to the mom or dad who has to do her job from the kitchen table, and right next to her is her elementary school child, where she has to help him or her with their schoolwork, right? So that's real world. That's about as real as we get. So how do we modernize? For our middle school and high school students, there's got to be opportunity to do some classes remotely or do some classes digitally so that they can begin to adapt to college, career, and military, right? For our elementary school kids, we need the socialization. We need to have that contact with adults all the time so that we can build the social constructs of life. And then just to build off of what Chuck said, is the issue of social emotional learning and mental health has been a big issue for us in schools, but will be of paramount importance when we arrive back in school. And we need to design programming and some new reimagined education that deals with that right from the beginning before we go back to dealing with instruction.
Yeah, I've been barking up a tree for the past several months. So you might chuckle when I reiterate what we've all been saying for the past 90 days, and that's the fact that we can dream up whatever we want, but if we don't take a minute and really dig down into the heart of the issue, and that's the injustices that are built inside our educational system across this country that were present before coronavirus, before the racial social justice efforts that are taking place right now. If we don't dig down and really face those face to face as adults and educators and do what's right for kids and knock these barriers down, it doesn't matter what we dream up for the fall when kids come back. It doesn't matter how we try to reimagine education in the classroom for kids. Some kids will get the experience and some kids won't. So we've got some systemic things that we need to dig into as a profession before we really start welcoming kids back into the building. And when they do get back, we've got to involve them. We've got to ask them, what did it feel like to be at home waiting for a phone call to figure out what your assignments were during remote learning? We've got to ask them what it felt like to not have a device or internet connectivity inside their home and wait for pickup day to get that packet of worksheets so they can participate in remote learning. We've got to ask them how we can get them residential internet access inside their homes so that when we do roll out our innovative, bold, reimagined plans for educating kids, we got assurance that every kid has access to that. So really digging down into some systemic equity issues that exist in our profession, in this educational structure in the country, is the utmost priority right now as we start to walk into the next 90 days and into the future, walking into the start of school year.
Dave,
Marlon, I hate to jump back in, but he hit a nerve with me, and I agree with him 100%. Why isn't it possible that every single K-12 kid gets a device and free Wi-Fi,
Yep.
just like many of us got a notebook and a pencil or a box of crayons, right? Why can't that just happen? Why can't that just be standard issue for kids in school? Because that's the connection that needs to be made in case we have to do things like that, like this again. And that begins the early stage of starting to level a couple of issues out. But they should get that as standard issue right from the beginning.
Well, Scott, let's build on that. Marlon testified in front of the U.S. Congress, right? The Education and Labor Committee, back in early May, Marlon, if I remember correctly. I read the testimony at the time in the Washington Post, and he advocated for digital equity for our students across the nation, especially in his hometown. And so we talk about, like, what are the gaps? There's still in New Jersey 75,000 kids not connected. That's just criminal.
Yeah.
It's educational neglect at its greatest. And so we've been here now 11 weeks in pandemic mode, and we have 75,000 kids in New Jersey not connected to the internet. Right?
Yeah.
There's something fundamentally wrong with our system. Our system is broken when we have kids not connected and not learning by packet. And then if we start thinking in terms of, like, from a guidance perspective, every single decision, like, once these decisions are made, it impacts where we put our efforts, right? So if we know we're digital in the fall, we're going to spend a lot of time prepping and working with staff around professional development to enhance the experiences that we've had to date digitally in the fall. However, we're expected to be back, and that shifts on us. We're going to put our efforts elsewhere. And then, where the decisions from the politicians come in impact how we plan, impacts how we staff, impacts our relationships with our associations, impacts our transportation contracts, impacts our staffing ratios, our budget. Everything gets impacted by it. And so we're going to all go out the next couple months and build multiple scenarios and spin our wheels. But at the end of the day, we're going to find out last minute, right before we open school, what the scenario is going to be, and everything's going to change on us. So we need decisions as early as possible so we can be honest with our families about the scenarios we face. And every community might not be equal. Every state might not be equal. And every county might not be equal, depending upon the impact of COVID to their communities. So states are going to have to decide, do we have a county or a zone decision, or are we going to have a statewide decision, a regional decision? States need to make those decisions and be honest and communicate with their publics now so we understand what the rules of the road are.
But yeah, Dave, before we transition and before we even get into some of those logistics, right? Let's just take one step back with some simple things that aren't technology based, don't have to do with access, right? So the central tenet that we all tried to follow in all of this was do no harm, right? The irony of that is we realized, and I think many folks who had not realized previously, is that a lot of the systems and structures do harm, right? And something as simple as grading. I think we've all rethought grading through this and what that looks like for kids and how are we fair to kids and what are the external circumstance on a child when they come to school and how do we spit out on this final grade. And I think, there can be some simple pivots there that don't have to do with, anything financial, right? It's just, it's a mindset change from educators. And I think we have to be there. And the other piece, I think what this has shined a light on is how decrepit the infrastructure, the physical buildings are of schools, how poorly invested we are as we all try to plan to come in September and figure out when we see pictures in Denmark and there's 8 kids in a high school class, easily socially distanced and there's no issues. And we're cramming 30 and 35 kids into a classroom. So I think those are some things that need to be rethought.
Wanted to shift gears. 2 words that Scott had mentioned, mental health. And one of our participants submitted the following question: how can we support the mental health of our students and staff who have experienced trauma amid the pandemic? And we're talking about loss, food insecurity, neglect, abuse.
There are a few things we've got going on out in Ohio. And if these are ideas that help other people, fantastic. If you don't like them, toss them in the trash and send me some newer ideas that are fresher. Definitely open for them. we have looked at our calendar and we've decided back in March to run 2 different groups. We had some design teams around contingency plans about what school looked like when we come back. We also have some design teams around a district social emotional plan to have in place in all 10 of our schools district-wide to be able to receive kids back into the school building when they return to school. We've been working on that for several months now. We feel like we're really in a good spot. Buildings are starting to finalize those plans and get them ready. I give you that precursor to let you know that we've taken our school calendar, we've shifted it. So we've added 5 full professional development days to the first week of August, purely for the adults to get ready to receive kids. So any preparations, preparing any type of digital lessons that might be needed in a future date for remote learning, preloading those things, that nature, rolling out our social emotional plans as well. The exciting piece that we've decided to do is we've adjusted our pacing guides, and we are not delivering any new content the first 3 weeks of the school year. 0. We're not teaching anything new. We're going to attack the, I call it the COVID slide and the summer slide married together. We're going to attack that with intervention enrichment for every kid across the district K-12. At the exact same time, for 3 very intense weeks, we are rolling out those building social emotional plans, and we're hitting that continuum of supports that kids need, from anything from those mild to those very intensive social emotional needs they have. That's very intense right off the bat to make sure we welcome kids back to the building, but get them a variety of those supports that they need. So I would encourage anyone out there listening to really, as you're talking about planning, get really creative about your school calendar, be really creative about your curriculum and your curriculum documents. You can shift those things different ways and talk about what you need to cover and when, and set those priorities on the kids' needs. But build that time in to make social emotional a top priority for those kids walking back in the building, no doubt about it.
Marlon, what's guidance looked like from the Ohio State Department of Ed? Have you received guidance, or is that decisions that your individual districts made?
Yeah, one of the running jokes we have right now is we plead the fifth when it comes to guidance. We're not getting it. There's been a lot of reasons why and different announcements why, but yeah, I plead the fifth on that because I don't have any guidance to offer.
You hit a great point. I'm going to steal some of that from you, Marlon, for when we open up some ideas. And that's really the purpose of these conversations, is that we share ideas and get ideas from us having conversations and what's happening on the side through the chat area. But the other piece to this is the mental health of the faculty and the staff. And I think that it's paramount upon every school district to not only prepare for our teachers' mental health, but for the faculty, staff, and I'm going to say the parents too, right? Because everybody has been traumatized in this environment. Everybody has had a struggle within this environment. And if we're going to truly heal, we do have to put the majority of our resources for our students, but we also have to have resources for our faculty and staff and for our parents. One of the things in our community newsletter that we put out each twice a week now, just 3 days a week, is a social emotional piece at the bottom for parents to help with their children. But as we've been doing that, we've been talking more and more about maybe we should also include some adult social emotional aspects to help them, because everybody's struggling. This is something none of us have gone through before. And if we want kids to be healthy, the adults working with them and the adults that are their caretakers need to be healthy too.
Has anybody considered a type of social emotional hotline for students? So one of our concerns is when we were pushed by our governor into remote learning, we've all pivoted overnight, but one of our faculty members came up with the concept of putting together some type of social emotional hotline for staff, for adults, for community members, primarily for kids, and having some community agencies help us man that hotline to give kids some supports while they were away from us, right? So we had hands on them every single day and access. We're able to respond to what they need. But anybody have anything like that on their drawing board?
We have a hotline, and we've utilized a hotline, where we, I think, tried to really focus our energies were having multiple adults responsible for one individual student on the check-in. And so that they're, in systems, kids fall through the cracks all the time. In a remote system, the cracks are caverns. And so understanding that, it was, for us, we had the hotline going, but we also wanted to make sure that there were 3 or 4 different checkpoints of adults with each student that might have been exhibiting some sort of behavior or checked out, or they can't get a hold of, or to express some, some frustration in social media or angst or fear. And then we've just built those as sort of live docs with the kid, and so they're going to follow that student into the fall. And when we come into September, to your point, Marlon, I see those first 30 days as just a time to heal, a time to tell kids you're okay. The world's going to be okay, and we're here for you. And I think building that sort of real live database about kids in your system will help expedite that process once it starts. So we've approached it from that way here.
Getting back into the classroom is obviously the most important component here. One of our participants had raised the issue as it pertained to extracurricular activities, specifically athletics, because let's face it, some of these kids that go to school, they need that athletic participation. It keeps them in the classroom. It keeps them focused academically. So if the panel doesn't mind addressing that topic, we obviously need to get kids back safely and teachers back safely in the building first. I get that, but we probably would be remiss if we didn't talk about the extracurricular component, perhaps athletics.
I don't mind jumping in there. National Federation for High School Sports has put out guidelines to their medical advisory committee. That's a team of, I believe, 16 doctors that govern that. And that's the agency that all the different athletic associations ascribe to across the state and across the country. I have their guidance is in 3 phases, and they talk about participation size in terms of 10 outside, 10 to 50 inside, and then 50 or more outside. And 3, then they look at contact sports and the severity of sports with respect to close contact. And their early guidance is no more than 10 athletes participating in any contest and no shared equipment. So if we start thinking about sports and shared equipment, and that means, and they give examples like no shared ball, no shared balls, no passing, catching, hiking, handoffs, anything for equipment. Without them being cleaned in between contacts. It is a damning proposition to think about what the fall athletics would look like, short of maybe fencing, which is, hit each other with sabers, or we wear masks and have equipment. So we start thinking about that. And in New Jersey, the governor has offered that high school sports can come back. And I've been an outstanding critic of the New Jersey Scholastic Sports Association. I will say the NJSIA came out today and said, no athletes will connect before August 1st, and we are waiting to build guidance. They've put a pump on the brakes to say, even though you can gather in size of 25, no more than 10 will come together, following the National Federation standards. So, the idea that we're going to have contact sports in the fall, I don't believe that we do anyone well when we lie to them. And so the idea that contact sports, we can't have 10 on a field, how are we going to have 10 on a line of scrimmage within 1 to 3 feet of each other? And then hitting each other. I am a huge advocate for football. I've advocated for state changes so that the sport can continue. At the same time, I have tremendous fear. So I think we need to start thinking of reimagining what athletics is going to look like, because I 100% agree with the question. The kids need that contact. They need those connections, and they need to know their teams are going to stay together. But what's that look like? We might need to rethink the time period in which the seasons begin. We may need to push things to the spring. I'm not for necessarily realignment of sports because it conflicts with athletes' participation and coaches' ability to coach. But I do think we might have to look at the time period in which the seasons run.
The thing to keep in mind on this, and I'm a huge proponent of extracurricular sports, clubs, marching band, performance, things like that for kids, because sometimes that's what drives them to come to school. That's what focuses them, right? But we also have to be realistic right now. These are different times, different experiences, different standards of health at this point. So if you can't have a football team lined up, to play, you're not going to have the marching band lined up. They're just as close as a football line. You're not going to have your choir lined up to sing. So things have to be adjusted, and we have to understand, as much as it's disappointing for kids and for parents and for school districts, we need to make sure that it's done safely. And that goes back to the very original part of this conversation about the guidance, the health guidance that comes from professionals that can help us to frame that out. And without it, we struggle in deciding what can and can't come back. And I'm glad NJSIAA has pumped the brakes on this, because that's going to help us to make some plans and hopefully collaborate with them to be able to put things in place so that kids are safe and healthy when they go back to athletics.
Scott, you talked about,
Here in Ohio.
sorry, Marlon.
So I'll give you an Ohio perspective. So our athletic director, J.D. Faust, and our city health commissioner, Jackie Phillips, we put together a plan to start transitioning kids back in extracurriculars ahead of time. Our governor just recently opened up the doors for Ohio high school athletics to begin skills training, individual skills training, not practice, not camps, but skills training. For an athlete, that means you're going to condition and run. So I'm not sure, Chuck, if you're excited about that, because I know you like to run that old school Packer sweep. We are 4 days into skills training here in Middletown City Schools in Southwest Ohio. Our football team, our basketball team, our cross-country team, tennis is out there, soccer out there. But our sports are back to skills training as of Monday of this week, 4 days in. I can tell you our parents are self-assessing their students' health prior to arrival. Our coaches are wearing face masks as kids arrive. They are taking temperatures of kids as they arrive. They are documenting their arrival and their health conditions as they arrive. They are practicing social distancing on the football field or the playing field as they engage in that training. They are not sharing equipment. We've encouraged kids to bring their own water bottles. Bathrooms are closed. But also coaches are keeping a log of which kids are attending each session and who they're attending it with, so that we can do some tracking should we need to. But I think the key that I would encourage you to really think about is planning ahead of time and sitting with your health commissioner. I'm not sure if you have a health commissioner attached to you or if there's a different term in New Jersey, but in Ohio, we're sitting with our health commissioners and doing some of that advanced planning so those safety protocols are in place ahead of time. And then we're communicating those out with parents and kids. What we've decided to do with our coaching staff is have a required meeting with them prior to any type of session to make sure that they are on the same page around the safety protocols. We've got confidence that they can adhere to them. But then also we've adopted one of the waivers that have been provided by the Ohio High School Athletic Association. And our players are signing that waiver before they participate in any type of a conditioning session / skills training session. But things are going very well here the first 4 days. So that gives you confidence out in New Jersey that you can bring kids back and let them start running around, not playing freeze tag, but running around, having some fun, being around the role models / coaches. Things are going very well here in Ohio.
Marlon, you're ahead of us. I think what's going to happen here, the political pressure will mount as we get closer and closer to the actual start of the fall athletic season. And there's some, sort of been two real distinct camps here in New Jersey. And I've said, time and time again, athletics are incredibly important. And they'll bring folks out when they don't happen, obviously. And having missed the spring season, I do think that there will be a massive parental churn here in New Jersey to push forward. And I'm not sure what that's going to ultimately look like, but, certainly, that when political pressure is at play and when enough constituents get together and start to push, then people start to readjust what some of those timelines might be like. And again, this is a shifting dynamic, issue here in New Jersey. So, things 3 weeks from now could be very different than today. But I would say when we round that bend into July, parents are going to be ready for that fall athletic season to occur. And it's going to build to a crescendo, and it will get real interesting if the brakes are still on at that point in time.
But to keep that in perspective, and I appreciate the perspective from Ohio in the work you're doing out there. Ohio has 36,000 cases as a state, averaging just around 400 cases a day, just under 350 to 400. New Jersey would be ranked, if an independent nation, we'd be 11th in the world. We're 163 to 164,000 cases. We're still around 600 to 1,000. We're varying in the last 2 weeks, number of cases. So I think it's 163,000 cases. And so a vast difference. And I think that's important to note because it is a question of what's the strategy of reentry if there's communities and districts that can reenter or can bring back their kids. But as we start thinking about reentering kids, we also have to think about where the staff comes from, the logistics of that, because then you could be potentially exposing your community. But as we're specifically thinking about athletics or we're talking about co-curriculars, I'm a father of 5. I have kids in the play, kids in the choir. Not necessarily kids on the ball field, but I think about all the socialization that happens around the plays, the musicals, the marching band, the athletics, and my heart bleeds for the kids with what they're losing. But there is a question of risk that we need to be thinking about, and the question is, should risk tolerance be part of the equation? And if the government believes it is, then they need to give us guidance today so that we can prepare our facilities to ensure that we're prepared to return and prepared to best meet the needs of the kids' educational needs. If we're going to be guided by public health until we get our head around what's really going on here, the question becomes, what's the instructional program look like? And then what do we learn from this to become what goes further, and what can we then apply towards the educational system? Because as some questions have been out there about what does this look like and what can we learn, and will brick and mortar exist beyond this? For some kids, this is working. As I said, I have 5 kids. For one of them, they're thriving in this environment. Not necessarily the others, but one is thriving. So for that one student, that one child, does that mean we can learn some lessons about future implications of what it can mean for schools?
Yeah,
Dave,
continuous
I'm sorry, Marlon.
guidelines and the lack thereof guidelines, right? It's just a continuing theme of the root cause of why we cannot make a decision. You brought up a really good point about the idea of assessment, right? We are really good at assessing kids on standards. I know Scott knows a slope intercept form in Algebra 1, but how am I supposed to determine his risk assessment as it relates to COVID-19? I got a license in education and administration and leadership and math. I don't have it when it comes to being a doctor. So, Dave, when you keep hammering that we need guidance, I mean, you can't stress it anymore. It's the point of the night.
Yeah.
So we were on a call this afternoon with county officials asking to form a cooperative for the purchasing of PPE, because who in our school district is a PPE expert, right? And so if the guidance is going to come down and you're going to need, face masks, certain guards, certain temperature gauges, who makes that decision ultimately? Who do we rely on for that? New Jersey, and I know Ohio has a lot of school districts as well, but we're 600 plus or so school districts. If we're all running out trying to buy different types of PPE, none of us are health officials. And so we're looking for the state to step in that regard, to at least come down and not only help guide us, but help us purchase cooperatively as well, from a financial standpoint. So those are all things that we're hoping for upon the reentry, prior to the reentry.
Chuck, and that's one of the bigger second pieces of this beyond the guidance is the actual purchase of materials that we need, supplies that we need to actually function. And somebody said to me, give it to me instead of qualitatively on how you guys are doing, tell us quantitatively on what you need. And I said, okay, let's put it in perspective. If I had to provide a mask for every employee and every student once a week in a 40-week school week, right? Nobody drops it, sneezes in it, anything like that. I need 600,000, give or take a little bit, right? But what level of mask do you need?
Right.
What sizes do you need? Is this mask going to work for a 5-year-old versus an 18-year-old, right? And so versus a 40-year-old. And those are all these complexities that we have to deal with. And then ordering 600,000 of those, you're ordering 500,000 of them, and Marlon's ordering 300,000 of them. Where's that supply coming from, right? That's going to be the struggle to be able to have that warehoused and ready to go.
Scott, it's an interesting point of liability. It's an interesting point of medical culpability. I mean, what is our responsibility in this? So if we have to, is it enough to say that everyone has a mask? Is it enough to say everyone has a cloth mask? Or is the district going to be responsible for providing the mask? And there's some that would say you have to provide one a day for everyone. Some would say you have to provide 3 a day on average for everyone. And some would say once a week. So for me, if it's once a week, everyone, it's 60,000 masks. It's 250,000 masks a month. It's essentially 2.5 million masks a school year. But if I have to provide 3 per day, because I know what it's like with a kindergartner at home, right? If I have to have 3 a day on average, that's 7.5 million masks. Now the question is, what's the supply chain? Because I'm one district. What's the supply chain look like for PPE? And am I taking masks from healthcare providers? Like what happens if there's a surge in the fall and I'm sitting with all the masks? I mean, there's a real logistical supply chain question out here about masks, shields, gowns. What's it look like for a nurse? What's it look like for a teacher? Who's taking the temperatures? What happens to the schedule? How about the length of the day? There's like real logistical things that we need guidance on. What's the square footage per classroom? I was on with the legislature recently and they said, I can't tell you how many kids per classroom. I don't know your rooms. I said, yeah, but you could tell me what's the appropriate square footage per child. And I can then do a calculation based on each school size classroom. So is it going to be 36 square feet per child? Or is that their individual space and then they have to have a buffer zone outside of them? Well, the difference in that impacts the number of kids you can put per classroom. And that has a ripple impact on then the whole master schedule and the schedule and then busing in contract and number of teachers and everything. As we're talking about budget shortfalls.
Dave, you and I talked about this, I think today. It was today or yesterday. Full-size bus, 54 passenger bus. If they do social distancing, how many kids can fit on that bus?
16.
11 to
16,
15.
I thought. No?
11 to 15 if you zigzag seat.
11 to 15 on a 54, right? So put that in perspective of the number of 54s that come in, and you're doing about almost a fifth, a little more than a fifth of that. So
Right.
How many more buses you can have? And in Jersey, I don't know about Ohio, but in Jersey, we already have a bus shortage and bus driver shortage, right? So there's
Well,
not
are you
going to be
also-
enough buses. There's seats.
And are you also asking the bus driver to take the temperature upon arrival and then ensure that the children are all socially distanced and then to monitor that while he or she is driving the kids to school?
So we just heard Dave talk about how many masks it would take, right? Now put a dollar figure on those masks. Let that sink in for just a second. Put a dollar figure on just a mask alone. I'm not talking about hand sanitizer, the extra cleaning that would have to take place and so on and so forth, but just the mask alone. In Ohio, our governor just announced a couple weeks ago, he's reducing K-12 budget by $300 million this fiscal year. We took some hits the last 2 months, and we're still waiting to find out what those reductions look like for the next upcoming fiscal year. He's got us on hold. Again, pleading the fifth on the guidelines, pleading the fifth on the future reductions. So the point I want to make right now is anybody on this call right now is a call to action. Call your local legislators and plead to them. The top priority is to stabilize our fiscal budgets at the state level. Keep our budgets whole, but also provide us the funds we need. CARES Act funds were fantastic, don't get me wrong. But if we're seeing additional reductions at the exact same time that we're getting some CARES Act funds, we're just being met whole. So please ask your legislators to stabilize our fiscal budgets at the state level, K-12 education, but also provide us the funds that we need to make sure the safety protocols are in place. We can afford what these so-called future guidelines are going to be asking us to do to keep adults and visitors and kids safe.
Marlon, the only pushback I'd give on CARES Act funding is I wouldn't say it was great. The average federal dollars was 280. If we go back, the New Jersey, the average state was 200. The average district was 200. My district was $23 a student.
Wow.
And that's because they split it in Jersey based on Title I funding. So every state sort of apportioned their dollars different, and some state legislatures chose to, or state DOEs chose to keep some money off the top, which is my understanding what happened in New Jersey for their own grant programs. So I'm not sure how it worked in Ohio, but at the end of the day, I seem to remember in your testimony, you talked about the amount of money that would be needed and what it was like back in 2010-11 with ARA funding. And that was a significantly different dollar.
Yeah, I can share that information if you like. I can pull it up real fast. So the CARES Act fund provided more than $2 trillion, but only 31 billion of that was for education. I think what you're mentioning right now is that American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that passed during the Great Recession. It was 800 billion, but 100 billion of that was for education. So again, a significant difference between the times and how important education is. So our call for Congress was for $175 billion in state fiscal stabilization funds for that primary reason. Great point.
Yeah, thank you.
But I'll put it in very real perspective at the county. So Monmouth County has 52, 53 districts. The OEM director put out a message. I think I can get my hands on 8,000 face shields. And I'm one of 52 districts. And I basically said, good, I'll take them all. You know, so that's going to be the mentality of even trying to access the equipment to begin with. And I saw in the chat from my man Chris that it's right. School districts are in such different places already at their funding levels, particularly here in New Jersey, and what they're already facing. We have, you know, funding legislation S2, which is basically sort of really hammering a third of our districts. You're going to have and have nots of districts that are not able to open versus districts that are more, I don't want to say flush with funds, but have more appropriate funding to meet the needs. And you're going to pit district against district with how this is all going to look in the fall if it continues that way.
But Chuck, there's a lie going on right now in Jersey. And Marlon, I don't know how it's playing in Ohio, but I'm going to guess it's something similar. And that's we had the reallocation of new dollars a week ago for our state aid going forward. That's a stopgap budget in Jersey. That's a budget from July 1 through September 30. And so we should all be on the lookout for the July 15th taxes, as well as the August 25th governor's address. And then most likely 2 days later, as tradition, from the address, we get a new state aid number. So the question becomes, from October 1st to June 30th, will our state aid number change? And what evasive actions do we need to take now, between now and June 30th, in order to make sure that we can absorb a hit in August, a week before school opens, as we start thinking in terms of what level of cut might we get, and then how do we make sure that we're not obliterating our master schedules, our class rosters, and our staffing, and all of our contracts right as we open school.
Dave, remember, I think it was during the Great Recession where, you know, those of us who've been around for a while, New Jersey skipped a state aid payment that was never made up. Our fear is that deferral is going to become a skipped payment, and we're all going to be grappling with that to fill a budget hole in the state.
Well, Chuck, to your point, the governor's already announced, or the Treasury has already announced, that the September payment would be delayed in New Jersey and pushed into the next budget year.
We're fearful that means skipped.
Right. Well, as we're talking about $5 billion shortfall from October 1st to June 30th, you have to push $1 billion into that year. So it's really a $6 billion gap. And in the Treasury report, if I read it correctly, it also indicates that if additional shortfalls exist regarding revenues, or if there's a second wave, it could be additional billion. So we're really talking about a $5 to $7 billion gap.
If I can shift gears, it's a two-part question from one of our participants regarding lost learning opportunities in this Reimagine school. So I'll share it with you. How can we be strategic in our thinking when it comes to recovering lost learning opportunities? And how do we prepare our teachers for the challenge of Reimagine school?
Well, I'll start there. I think when we talk about, let's move beyond the absolute starting need of dealing with social, emotional, and mental health. So that's there. That has to happen first before we get into the actual instruction. When we get back into the instruction, I think there's going to need to be a focus on professional development. You know, Marlon mentions they're going to do 5 days before they start. So part of it is going to be mental health. I assume part of it's going to be new design thinking, new instructional thinking. I think we have to look at our schedules. We have to be adaptive in our schedules. So at our elementary schools, we have a new schedule this year, which we didn't get to fully see the benefits of, but we have morning meeting, and then we have during the day what I need period or when period, where students can get extra help, or they can advance some learning, they can work in small groups with a teacher or one-on-one. I think that when period is going to need to be more structured and designed, and our teachers are going to need more training on it, how to meet the needs of the students. And then ultimately, as educators, we're going to have to go to the students. The learning is not exclusively going to be in-house in the brick and mortar. We're going to have to figure out ways to take the learning to our students. Within our community, we're going to have to look for places where maybe we can go on a weekend or after school and go to where kids in their neighborhoods, if there's a small park or something where kids can come and learning can be a little more fun and engaging in a different environment. But we're going to have to change the dynamic a little bit, because as some students are learning in this environment and thriving in this environment, as David said, other students aren't. I have 3 children. One of them's in college and 2 of them are in school. One's a high schooler, one's a middle schooler, and they have various stages of success in remote learning. And some subjects they're thriving, and other subjects are struggling because they just need the teacher, right? They need the contact, they need to be there, they need to see things. But I think we're going to have to rethink how and where we do additional support in learning, and it's going to have to go into the community. And I think that's an important piece moving forward.
So Scott, at the secondary level, I think it's something we've long asked for. So we were given flexibility this year around the 180-day requirement and what a school day looked like. Allowing us flexibility to restructure our school days that get off of the Carnegie unit seat time attachments. We have to work backwards from where every student is. And, you know, the catchphrase, you know, the buzzword is personalization, but it's not even about personalization. It's about these students are going to have so many different experiences when they land on our shores in September in terms of where they are. We're going to need to sort of triage that, understand where those students are, and then bake schedules around that. And there's all kinds of factors that work against that: collective bargaining agreements, state seat time requirements, required coursework. But I think over the next couple of years, whoever's, you know, and we know there's turnover in the DOE right now in New Jersey, they need to really allow us a voice at the table to rethink the structure of the school day and what that looks like for all kids, because that's the only way, in my opinion, that we're going to be able to meet all those students where they are. Who, to your point, I have 4 children. Some have done better than others in all this. My son would live on this forever because he does the bare minimum each day and rides his bike and runs and loves life, you know. But I think we have to understand that we've also learned, my high schooler, she slept a lot later, felt a lot better, you know, and did her work on her time. The absolute just dated processes that we use to measure student progress in New Jersey need to be shelved.
No, I think we just need to also pause and just say that our teachers have done such remarkable work. And when we're going to need to hear their voice and talk and reflect upon what we've learned during this, because they're in their students' homes, right? They're engaging with their students in a real personal way, as you're seeing my office behind me, right? They're seeing families, they're seeing parents, they're seeing interactions, they're getting to know families very personally. But they've also grown skill sets in technology in a way that we couldn't have imagined. This has been an accelerator in that respect. So we're gonna need to take some time to really think about, and we're gonna need to hear their voices in the process of how we move this forward. And we're gonna need to hear. There's gonna be a lot of steps needed, but the opportunities are there. And to Chuck's point, we're gonna need tremendous flexibility. I don't envision a model where we're 50% in one day, 50% in the next day. I don't envision a model where we're all back in September 1. I envision a model where we're really starting to think about how do we meet targeted needs, targeted students in a COVID environment, not a post-COVID. We're going to be in this environment for some time if we listen to science. You know, if the question becomes what's the driver? Is it the economy or is it public health? And if we're talking about public health and safety, because any schedule short of bringing everyone in all day doesn't help the economy. Right? If you go to an AB, you go to a morning, afternoon, you go to a flex schedule, you go to 1 day a week, whatever you do, you throw parents' work schedules right out the window, right? So anything short of everyone in or everyone out doesn't help the economy, right? I mean, it just grounds you to a halt. So the real question becomes, you know, public health. How do we make decisions now for the health of our students, health of our staff? And we can look at 3 countries: South Korea, Singapore, Israel. Those 3 countries all opened, and those 3 countries have all now closed some or all of their schools, because as soon as they opened, they saw tremendous spikes. And the question becomes, where are the health guidelines from our Department of Eds about what our responsibilities are today? Because if you ask me to make modifications to my facilities, it's going to take time to make those modifications. And then it impacts other code. And right now, the governor has given the commissioner the opportunity to waive executive order on certain educational requirements, but he hasn't been able to let him waive fire code or building code. So there's public health code, there's fire code, there's uniform building code, there's education code. We intersect with all of them. So if you ask my architect today, what's it going to look like to build an isolation room in a nurse's office? There is no standard. If you ask them, what's the HVAC, the heating, ventilation, air conditioning system requirements in a post-COVID, in a COVID world? What's the indoor outside air intake levels? What should an entranceway look like? What's an outside staging area look like? 50 buses just pulled up, and we had 11 kids per bus. So 550 kids just got off. There's 1 nurse doing temperature checks. What's staging? Okay, and it just started to rain. What's this look like in real time? When every plan is great until you put kids and staff into it. We're building fictitious plans with no people involved. So what's it look like when we actually start thinking about the impact to children, to our students, to our staff? And there's a lot of what if scenarios where we need guidance on today, and it needs to be driven by public health, educational professionals, and industry experts.
Great points, Dave.
Agreed.
Chuck, you mentioned about getting a voice at the table. What can educators do to get a voice at the table?
I think that, first and foremost, what you have in New Jersey is a splintered reaction, so there are 7 or 8, and you guys correct me if I'm wrong, Marlon, I don't know if this is the case in Ohio, there's multiple sort of restart committees all working in various silos. I think that, and they're all working, to Dave's point, to unknown outcomes, with no people involved, and that just convolutes things. I think that I know every school, so right now we are surveying our faculty, our staff, our community. We are running focus groups. We are collecting real-time data from the students in our system about what is and what is not working. I think that school districts have access to that real experience, that real data. I had a call today with my exec cabinet, and they told me exactly what worked well, what needs to be improved for next year. The students know, the faculty and staff know what those experiences have looked like, and the communities know how they've responded. And I think schools have done an excellent job of collecting that data. It's there if they're allowed to have a voice in a way that is meaningful to direct policy. And that's where it gets a little bit convoluted.
As this town hall draws to a close, I'd like to ask Dave to touch on some of the topics that will be discussed in future panel discussions.
Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate that. And I really want to say thank you to Marlon for joining us from Ohio.
Thank you, Marlon.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Really appreciate it.
Good job on that algebra 1.
And Chuck and Scott and Mike and Jay on the line, and everyone that's participated in the chat on joining us online. So this is about helping to start a conversation, to help raise voice. We've really been trying to figure out how to ask questions and gain access at the table. And many of us, and we've been, and Chuck and Scott and I have all had the opportunity, Mike, all had the opportunity to be on some of the restart committees, be on some of the steering committees, give voice to the Department of Ed. And we've been invited. I mean, I like to give credit to our commission. We've been invited to give feedback. But somewhere in the process is broken, where we're not getting decisions. I'll give an example. Extended school year starts for many districts on July 5th, 6th, this Monday, July 6th. Extended school years for our special needs students, our special education populations, are students that are in risk of regression and regroupment based on an analysis done by our child study teams, medically fragile, educationally fragile students, our most vulnerable students in our school districts. We have zero guidance in New Jersey about what that looks like for the summer. Zero. There is emails from many of us dating back into April asking for guidance. And our department has responded and had conversation, but somewhere along the line, there's no guidance. Many of us have just taken interim steps and moved to virtual. But it's it's paramount to educational neglect. And we have no guidance at this point regarding an extended school year. And that's just one example. Chuck's earlier example about four different guidances on graduation. You know, at some point we need guidance that sticks and guidance that's real and guidance that we can build upon. So the purpose of Restart is to also bring together industry experts. So we're going to open up forums on social emotional learning. So next Thursday at 8 o'clock, and we'll put out this soon, we'll have 4 panelists that are going to be joining us. Mike Salvatore from Long Branch Superintendent is going to be representative. You will not see any of the ones that are currently on the panel today join next week. We'll be in the virtual chat rooms. Nellie Perez, Assistant Superintendent. Nellie's going to join from Matawan Aberdeen. Alicia Di Lorenzo from Garden State Equality, the interim executive director, is going to join. She's a tremendous voice in the field for social emotional learning, ACEs, mental health, for educators, mindfulness expert, just a tremendous resource to the field. And Ken McGill, Ken's a professor at Rutgers University. He's the senior training and consultation specialist for Rutgers University Behavioral Health. Ken oversees training across the state of New Jersey in the CANS model. So we're going to have 4 industry experts, and we're going to see if we can build out some more. Join us around social emotional learning, wellness, and mental health. But then we're going to be working with our attorneys. We're working with our nurses and doctors, school doctors around the state. We'll be working with architects and bringing forward continued panels around industry topics that need to have a light shed on them to help inform all of us about what we need to do to properly prepare for the fall. Whether that's fall virtually, or that's fall physically, or it's a fall in a hybrid. We need guidance from industry experts about how to proceed. So we hope that everyone on the call joins us, spreads the word, and comes back for future conversations. We greatly appreciate everyone for being here this evening, and we look forward to continuing the conversation about how do we support the needs of our students, our faculty, our communities that deserve guidance, deserve truth, and deserve honest feedback about what's happening and where we're going as a profession. And Greg, I just want to say really thanks for you
Thank you, Greg.
for being here and dedicating your time to being on with us tonight.
Yeah, appreciate it, Greg. Thank you.
Privilege.
Thanks, everybody.
I want to thank the panelists and everyone for joining us, and please consider following the RestartED team on Twitter handle @RestartED team. Best wishes to everyone and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.